One afternoon at a fast food restaurant, a 52-year-old man in a neat gray suit just wanted a quick meal before his meeting. But when it was his turn, the young cashier suddenly turned cold, telling him to wait indefinitely while others were served right away. He pulled out his phone and made a call. No one in the restaurant knew that after that call everything would change, and the cashier would regret it for the rest of her life. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The lunch rush at Golden Grill was in full swing. The familiar smell of grilled chicken and seasoned fries filled the air as customers streamed through the glass doors of the Cleveland location. The restaurant buzzed with the typical midday energy: office workers grabbing quick meals, construction crews on break, teenagers sharing baskets of wings. James Walker stepped inside, adjusting his simple gray suit jacket. At 52, he carried himself with quiet confidence, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed. He glanced at his watch, 12:47 p.m. Perfect timing. His important meeting with potential investors was just 2 blocks away at 2:15, and he'd calculated this would give him enough time for a quick lunch without the fuss of a sit-down restaurant. He'd built his schedule around efficiency today. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was choosing his own restaurant for convenience, but that was exactly the point. Golden Grill was supposed to be fast, reliable, accessible to everyone. He tucked his folded newspaper under his arm and joined the line behind a woman in scrubs and a man in a hard hat. The line moved at a decent pace. James watched the familiar dance of his employees behind the counter, the coordinated movements he'd observed 1,000 times during his visits to various locations. The golden and red color scheme he'd personally approved years ago still looked fresh. The menu boards displayed the same affordable prices that had made Golden Grill a household name. 2 customers ahead of him, a white woman in business attire, ordered a chicken sandwich meal. The cashier, a young blonde woman whose name tag read Megan, smiled brightly. "Absolutely. Would you like to make that a combo with our crispy fries?" "Yes, please. Perfect choice. That'll be ready in just a few minutes." The woman paid and moved aside, her order already being prepared with visible urgency by the kitchen staff. Next came an elderly white man with a thick Cleveland accent. "I'll take the same thing she had," he said, pointing toward the departed customer. Megan's smile never wavered. "You got it, sir. 1 chicken sandwich combo coming right up." She processed his payment quickly, calling out his order number with enthusiasm. "Number 47. James stepped forward. He'd been watching Megan's interactions, noting her energy and professionalism. This was exactly the kind of service that had built Golden Grill's reputation. But something shifted the moment Megan looked up at him. Her bright smile flickered, replaced by something more mechanical. Her eyes traveled from his face down to his shoes and back up again, a quick assessment that lasted barely a second but felt much longer. The warmth that had been genuine moments before now seemed forced, like she was putting on a performance rather than simply doing her job. "Can I help you?" The words were correct, but the tone had changed. It wasn't hostile exactly, but it lacked the enthusiasm she'd shown the previous customers. James noticed but chose to ignore it. He'd dealt with subtle shifts in people's attitudes his entire life. "I'll have the grilled chicken deluxe meal with seasoned fries and a Coke." "Okay." Megan's fingers moved across the register screen, but slower than before. She didn't offer any of the upselling or friendly commentary she'd given the others. "No great choice or anything else I can get you today." James pulled out his wallet, extracting exact change he'd counted while waiting in line. As he placed the bills on the counter, Megan's expression tightened slightly. She picked up the money without making eye contact. Actually," she said, pausing as if something had just occurred to her. She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at James with a slight frown. "I'm sorry, but there's going to be a small issue with your order." James raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" We're having some trouble with the grill right now. It's going to take a little longer than usual." She gestured vaguely toward the kitchen area where James could clearly see grilled chicken being prepared for other orders. "Would you mind stepping over to the side to wait?" The request itself wasn't unreasonable. Sometimes orders took longer, sometimes equipment had problems. But James had been watching the same kitchen prepare identical meals for the customers ahead of him without any apparent issues. He glanced at his watch again. He had time, but not unlimited time. "How long do you think it'll be?" Megan shrugged, not quite meeting his eyes. Just a few minutes. We'll call your name when it's ready. James looked around the restaurant. The normal flow of service continued behind him. Customers ordered, paid, and received their food in the familiar rhythm he'd designed the system to achieve. The kitchen staff moved with practiced efficiency, filling orders that appeared on their screens. Something felt off, but he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. "All right," he said finally. He didn't want to create a scene over what might genuinely be a minor technical issue. "I'll wait over here." He moved to an empty table near the window, setting down his newspaper. Through the glass he could see the busy Cleveland street, people walking with purpose toward their afternoon destinations. He checked his phone, no urgent messages from his assistant Linda about the upcoming meeting. Behind him, the line continued moving. He heard Megan's voice brighten again as she helped the next customer, a white teenager who received the same enthusiastic service James had observed earlier. "Hi there, what can I get started for you today?" James unfolded his newspaper but found himself distracted. He watched the kitchen through peripheral vision, noting the steady stream of grilled chicken meals being assembled and sent out. The equipment seemed to be working perfectly fine. An uncomfortable feeling began settling in his stomach, and it had nothing to do with hunger. He checked his watch one more time and settled back in his chair. "A few minutes," she'd said. He could wait a few minutes. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the restaurant floor. James folded his hands and prepared to be patient, unaware that his wait was just beginning. James sat at the small table near the window, newspaper folded but untouched. He checked his watch again, 12:58. Only 11 minutes had passed since he'd placed his order, but it felt longer. He reminded himself that he still had time. His meeting wasn't until 2:15. Patience came naturally to him. Decades in business had taught him the value of waiting. The sound of Megan's voice carried across the counter. Bright, quick, cheerful. "Order number 48. A young couple in hoodies hurried up to grab a tray piled with fries and wings. They thanked her and left, laughing. James glanced at the kitchen. 2 cooks moved efficiently, flipping chicken, scooping fries, plating meals. Everything seemed to be running smoothly. His eyes drifted back to the counter. Megan smiled at the next customer, leaning forward with interest. James remembered the flat tone she had used with him just minutes earlier. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of his watch. He didn't want to dwell on it. He'd been in enough situations in his life where a look, a pause, or a tone carried more weight than words. Maybe this was nothing. By 1:05, he had seen at least a dozen customers receive their food. Businessmen in suits, college kids in Golden Grill t-shirts, a delivery driver with paint on his hands. Each one walked away with a tray, hot food steaming in the bright light of the counter. James's stomach tightened, not from hunger but from the steady realization that he was the only one still waiting. He shifted in his chair, adjusted his jacket, and picked up the folded newspaper, trying again to distract himself. The words blurred, his ears kept catching the rhythm of the restaurant. Order, pay, receive, leave. At 1:18, James placed the paper back on the table. He tapped his phone awake. No new emails, no messages from Linda. He typed a short note to himself about the upcoming investor meeting, then locked the screen. Another order number rang out. Another tray slid onto the counter. Another customer walked away smiling. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His patience was still intact, but a thin thread of doubt wound tighter in his chest. By 1:32, the restaurant had thinned out. The line at the counter was shorter, only a handful of customers left. Most of the tables near James were empty, cleared of wrappers and cups. The buzz of the lunch rush had softened to background noise. James stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. He walked back to the counter with calm, measured steps. Megan was wiping down the register area between orders. She looked up as he approached. Her smile faded almost instantly. "Excuse me," James said, his voice even. "Could you check on my order? I've been waiting a while." Megan glanced over his shoulder, then down at the register. She avoided his eyes. "It's still being processed," she said quickly. Her tone was flat again, a sharp contrast to the way she'd greeted other customers. James tilted his head slightly. "It's been close to 45 minutes. Her lips pressed together. She flicked her eyes toward the kitchen, then back at the screen. "Just a little longer, sir, we're working on it." The word "sir" landed without warmth. She didn't apologize, she didn't offer an explanation, she didn't check with the cooks. She simply picked up a rag and started wiping the counter again, turning her body slightly as if to dismiss him. James paused, holding his ground for a moment. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "All right, thank you." He turned and walked back to his table, his shoulders straight but heavier than before. He sat down, eyes lingering on the counter where another customer, a teenager in a baseball cap, was already receiving his tray. James lowered his gaze to the table. He pressed his hands together, fingers interlaced, resting against his chin. For the first time that afternoon, a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, just a tightening around his eyes, a downward pull at the corners of his mouth. At 1:47, the restaurant was nearly empty. A few stragglers remained, finishing their meals in silence. The cooks in the back leaned on counters, chatting quietly. Megan scrolled through her phone when no one was at the register. James checked his watch again. An hour had passed since he'd ordered. He could feel the weight of the time pressing against him. His meeting was still possible, but the margin he had carefully built into his day was slipping away. He stood once more, walked to the counter, and waited until Megan noticed him. She looked up, expression neutral. "Yes," James's voice was soft but steady. "It's been an hour, could you tell me when my food will be ready?" Megan's eyes flicked past him toward the door, as if hoping for another customer to interrupt. She shifted her weight, resting one hand on her hip. "We're handling it," she said. "Please wait a little longer." Her tone carried no apology, no urgency, no acknowledgement of the time he had already spent waiting. James inhaled slowly, then nodded once. "All right." He walked back to his table again, each step slower than before. He sat down, folded his hands on the newspaper, and looked out the window. The busy street outside had calmed too, afternoon shadows stretching across the sidewalk. For the first time, James didn't check his watch. He didn't reach for his phone, he simply sat in silence, eyes fixed ahead but unfocused. His patience, once steady and practiced, had begun to feel like a burden. The hum of the restaurant faded into the background. The sound of trays clattering, fries sizzling, Megan's bright voice rising again for other customers, all of it washed over him without breaking through. James blinked slowly, his eyes carrying the weight of quiet disappointment. The weight was no longer just about food. It was about something heavier, something he had known too many times before. The door opened again, and a man in his 40s walked in with quick, confident steps. His brown leather shoes clicked on the floor, his pressed shirt still crisp despite the afternoon heat. He looked like someone used to being served without question. He stepped into line, phone in hand, scrolling as if this stop was nothing more than a minor errand. His name, as the cashier would greet him, was Richard Collins. James barely lifted his head, his eyes were heavy from waiting. His watch read 2:06, he had calculated his day with precision, but every extra minute now cut into his schedule. Richard reached the counter, Megan's face lit up instantly. She leaned forward, her tone warm. "Hi there, what can I get started for you today?" "I'll have the grilled chicken deluxe meal, fries and a Coke." James's head jerked up. The same order, exactly the same. His stomach tightened, not from hunger but from the realization forming in his chest. Megan keyed it in quickly. "Great choice, we'll have that right out." James turned slightly in his chair, eyes fixed on the kitchen. The cooks moved in perfect rhythm, pulling chicken off the grill, sliding buns from the warmer, scooping fries into paper containers. It was the same process he'd been watching for over an hour. Minutes later, Megan called out, "Order 65. She held up a tray stacked with food, fresh, hot, complete. Richard slid his phone into his pocket, strolled forward, and grabbed the tray. He nodded at Megan with a smile and carried the meal to a table in the center of the room. Steam rose from the fries, the sandwich wrapper glistened with heat. James stared, his jaw clenched. The sound of the clock in his head grew louder than the noise of the restaurant. An hour of patience dissolved in seconds. He pushed back his chair. The scrape of the legs against the tile drew attention from the few customers still lingering. He walked straight to the counter. His steps were steady, but there was weight in them. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet anger. Megan looked up, her smile faltered. Yes? James spoke slowly, but every word carried steel. I've been waiting for more than an hour. I ordered that exact same meal. He walked in less than 5 minutes ago, and he already has his food. Explain that. The restaurant froze. A couple near the door stopped mid-conversation. A young woman at a corner table lowered her fries, watching closely. Megan's posture stiffened. Her voice dropped, defensive. Sir, we're doing the best we can. Things happen. Please be patient. James leaned forward slightly, not aggressive but direct. No. I've been patient. I've sat quietly while you served everyone else. I watched you hand him the same food I ordered, without delay. Why is mine different? Megan shifted on her feet, her jaw tightened. Sir, you're making a scene. I need you to step aside. James's tone sharpened, though he never raised his voice. A scene? No. I'm asking for the truth. Why have I been ignored while others get served? Her face flushed red. She dropped the rag she had been holding and placed both hands firmly on the counter. Her words came out louder, sharper. Because we'll serve whoever we want, whenever we want. That's how it is. Now stop holding up the counter. The silence that followed was louder than her voice. The cooks in the back froze. The handful of customers stared openly. A teenager near the window whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Her friend pulled out a phone, tapping record. The red light glowed as the camera focused on James and Megan. Richard paused mid-bite, setting down his sandwich. He glanced uneasily between the two of them, shifting in his seat. James didn't move. He stood still, shoulders squared, his face controlled but tense, his eyes locked on Megan's steady, unblinking. "You're telling me," he said, voice low and deliberate, "that you decide who deserves service and who doesn't. That's what you're saying to me, here in front of everyone." Megan crossed her arms, defensive, chin lifted. "You heard me. We don't have to explain ourselves to you." The murmurs around the room grew. A man in a hard hat muttered, "That's messed up." Another customer shook his head slowly, whispering, "Unbelievable." The teenager's camera zoomed in, catching every word, every expression. James's breathing deepened, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured rhythm. He didn't shout, he didn't slam his hands down, he didn't give her the satisfaction of losing control. His restraint only made the room feel tighter, the tension heavier. He finally spoke, his tone cutting through the silence. "You've made yourself very clear." The words carried finality, a quiet authority that filled the space. The customers leaned forward, phones angled higher. Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though hoping someone else would intervene. Megan's face was rigid, her stance locked, but there was the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. James didn't move away. He stood in the silence, the weight of the room pressing around him. For the first time, the entire restaurant shared his weight, every second stretching into something heavier than time. James didn't answer Megan. He didn't argue with her. His face remained calm, unreadable, but his eyes stayed locked on her for another second before he turned away. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and scrolled with steady fingers. The silence in the room made every movement noticeable. Customers watched closely, phones half raised. He pressed a single number and lifted the phone to his ear. His voice was low, controlled. "I need you at the store. Now." He ended the call, slid the phone back into his pocket, and returned to the same chair by the window. His posture was upright, his hands folded on the table. He didn't touch the newspaper. He didn't look at Megan again. The tension in the restaurant didn't fade. Conversations didn't resume. People whispered in small bursts, then quieted when Megan glanced their way. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pushing his tray forward as though he'd lost his appetite. The teenager near the corner kept her phone pointed discreetly, recording everything. Minutes passed slowly, the fryer hissed, the overhead fans hummed, but no one seemed to notice. Every eye drifted toward James, then back to Megan, then to the door. At 2:23, the glass doors swung open. A tall woman in a dark skirt suit entered first. Her heels clicked on the floor with precision. Behind her came a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, his posture firm, his stride quick. The woman's name was Linda Carter, James's longtime assistant. The man was Mark Evans, regional director of Golden Grill. They didn't hesitate. They didn't pause to look around. They walked directly toward James's table, their expressions serious, their pace steady. The air shifted in an instant. Customers sat straighter, instinctively moving their belongings aside. Megan froze. Her hands dropped from the register. The color drained from her face as she realized who they were approaching. "Mr. Walker," Linda said softly, stopping beside him. She leaned down slightly, her tone respectful, almost apologetic. "I came as soon as you called." Mark stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room before focusing on James. He nodded deeply. "Sir." The single word carried weight. It echoed differently than anything Megan had heard all day. James rose slowly from his chair. He buttoned his jacket with calm precision, then looked at both of them. His voice was quiet but firm. "Thank you for coming." Mark glanced at Megan, then at the stunned faces of the customers, then back at James. He straightened his shoulders. "On behalf of Golden Grill, I want to apologize. This never should have happened." The reaction from the room was immediate. Whispers rippled through the tables. "Did he say Mr. Walker? Wait, is that? No way." Recognition spread like a current. Golden Grill wasn't just another fast food chain in Cleveland. It was a name people knew, a place many of them had grown up with. And James Walker wasn't just another man in a gray suit. He was the founder, the owner, the reason the restaurant existed at all. A middle-aged customer near the window muttered, "That's him. That's the guy." His wife nodded, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. Megan's knees weakened. She grabbed the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, her lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. The bright confidence she'd worn all shift had vanished, replaced by the pale shock of someone who realized too late what she had done. James didn't look at her. He stood still, hands at his sides, his face composed but stern. His silence spoke louder than anger ever could. Mark turned fully toward the customers and staff. His voice carried authority, sharp and clear. "What happened here is unacceptable. Golden Grill was built on fairness, on respect for every customer who walks through those doors. What I've witnessed today, what many of you witnessed, is the opposite of that." The teenager's phone recorded every word. Others followed, pulling out their cameras, their screens glowing in the dimmer afternoon light. Mark continued, his tone tightening. "Effective immediately, the cashier on duty and the shift manager responsible will be suspended. We will not tolerate discrimination or negligence in any form." A murmur swept through the room. Some nodded, others whispered in disbelief. Richard looked down at his tray, ashamed. Megan's mouth opened. "I didn't." Mark cut her off with a raised hand. "Enough. I heard you. They heard you." He gestured toward the customers, toward the phones recording from every angle. His eyes hardened. "There is no excuse for the way this customer was treated. Not when that customer is Mr. Walker, and not when it's anyone else." Megan's face flushed red, then drained pale again. Her breathing grew shallow, her hands trembling as she tried to hold her ground. James finally moved. He stepped closer to the counter, his presence alone commanding silence. He looked at Mark, then at Linda, then at the room. Still he didn't raise his voice. "People should not have to prove who they are to be treated with respect," he said simply. His tone was calm, but the weight behind the words pressed into the air. The customers listened closely. Phones captured his expression, his steady posture, the way he didn't need to shout to make the point clear. Mark nodded firmly. "Understood, sir. We'll handle it." The room remained frozen, the atmosphere transformed. What had started as an ordinary lunch rush was now something no one present would forget. Customers exchanged looks of disbelief, some shaking their heads, others whispering, "Unreal," as they kept recording. Megan stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. James stayed quiet after his last words. He didn't need to explain further. His presence, the respect from Linda and Mark, and the visible shock on Megan's face told the story better than any speech could. For the first time that day, he wasn't the one waiting. The entire room was waiting for what would happen next. Mark turned from James to the crowd of customers, his face serious. He raised his voice just enough for the entire dining room to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Golden Grill, I want to apologize for what happened here today. No customer should ever be treated the way Mr. Walker was treated. This is not who we are, and it will not be tolerated." Phones lifted higher. Several customers recorded openly now, their lenses aimed at Mark as his words filled the room. The teenager who had started recording earlier whispered to her friend, "This is going viral." James remained silent, standing a few steps behind him. His expression was calm but distant, his eyes scanning the tables, the faces, the cameras. He wasn't surprised that people were filming. He knew the moment had already moved beyond this restaurant. Mark looked back to James, his voice steady. "Sir, I take full responsibility. I'll personally make sure this never happens again." James stepped forward, his movements measured. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried through the silence. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I just went through. Not here, not in any of our restaurants. From today forward, every employee, cashier, cook, manager, will complete mandatory training. Training on fairness, on respect, on what it means to serve people with dignity." Linda, standing beside him, opened her notebook immediately. Her pen moved quickly across the page, her nod sharp and deliberate. "I'll set it up, Mr. Walker," she said. Mark's agreement came just as firmly. "It'll be done. I'll contact HR tonight and schedule the program chain-wide. No delays." The customers listened closely. Some nodded, some whispered in approval. A man in work boots muttered, "About damn time," while a woman near the door whispered, "That's leadership." James's eyes softened slightly as he looked around the room again. He saw the faces of strangers, people who had no idea who he was when he first walked in. He noticed their sympathy now, their anger on his behalf. But he also saw the unease, the awareness of how quickly things could shift when fairness wasn't guaranteed. He let the silence stretch for a moment, before speaking again, his voice calm. "Respect should not depend on recognition. No one should need a title or a name for their order to matter. If we fail to remember that, then we fail at the very idea of Golden Grill." Several phones caught those words. They would echo online later, replayed in countless clips and comments. But inside the restaurant, the weight of his statement settled immediately. Megan, still frozen behind the counter, looked like she wanted to disappear. Her hands trembled as she stared at the floor, her lips pressed tightly together. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't lift her head. James didn't look at her directly. He didn't need to. His disappointment wasn't in her alone. It was in the failure of the entire system that had allowed this moment to happen. He took a slow breath, then buttoned his jacket again, signaling he was finished. "That's all I have to say." Mark gave a firm nod. "Understood." He turned to the room once more. "Everyone here is a witness. This isn't going away. Starting now, we'll be better, or we won't deserve your trust." A few customers clapped softly, hesitant at first, then more followed. It wasn't applause of celebration, but of acknowledgement, a recognition of what they had just seen. James didn't react to the clapping. He glanced at Linda. "We need to get going." She closed her notebook, tucking it neatly under her arm. "The car is ready, sir." Mark stepped aside as James moved toward the door. Every eye followed him, phones still recording, murmurs spreading across the room. Some customers whispered his name, others simply watched in silence. As James reached the door, he paused. He placed his hand lightly on the glass push bar, but didn't press forward immediately. Instead he turned his head slightly, glancing back at the dining room one last time. His gaze moved over the tables, the employees, the faces lit by phone screens. His eyes lingered for a brief second on the Golden Grill logo above the counter. He looked at it the way a parent might look at a child who had disappointed them but still carried hope for change. His expression was not angry now, but firm, steady, lined with sadness. Then he pushed the door open. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a soft glow across the street. Shadows stretched long on the sidewalk, the city slowing into evening. James stepped onto the pavement, the cool air brushing against his face. He stopped just a few feet from the entrance. For a moment, he didn't move. He tilted his head back, looking up at the large red and gold sign mounted above the restaurant's doors. Golden Grill. The name he had built, the brand he had spent his life shaping. Linda waited quietly beside him, her notebook tucked under her arm. Mark stood just inside, watching carefully. Neither said anything. James's expression didn't waver. His eyes stayed on the sign, his jaw set with quiet resolve. Dignity should never be made to wait, he said finally, almost to himself but loud enough for Linda to hear. Then he added, justice only matters when it comes with action. Linda nodded once, writing nothing, just absorbing the words. James turned, walking toward the car parked at the curb. Each step was slow, deliberate, steady. Behind him, the glass doors closed, leaving the restaurant buzzing with the aftershock of what had unfolded. Inside, customers talked quietly, phones still in hand, already imagining the captions and clips that would spread online. Megan stood pale and silent, her future uncertain. Mark issued quiet instructions to the remaining staff, his voice low but firm. On the street, James reached the car. He opened the back door, paused once more, and looked back at the sign. The sunlight reflected off the red letters, glowing against the sky. He let the image settle in his mind, before ducking into the car. The door closed softly, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging into traffic. The Golden Grill sign faded into the distance behind him, but the weight of the moment stayed with everyone who had witnessed it.